specifically because nobody would talk back to these people. They're bound by, and my institutional friends will appreciate this, they're bound by having to be considered respectable by their peers or civil in public discourse. And I went out on my own and I didn't have to do that. So, you know, these people start talking about how they want to sexualize children. I say, okay, groomer. And I just leave it at that, you know, and I clap back at them vigorously. And my intention from the beginning was to teach people that you can stand up to these people, that you don't have to be bound by these kind of made up rules of decorum that keep you on your back foot. Because most of the things that they do are manipulations. They have three primary tactics that are all meant to drain you of your ability to stand on your own too. The first of those is to make you look stupid, to drain you of what I call intellectual authority or epistemic authority if you want to get philosophical about it. So they know better than you. They know the complicated theory. You don't even know what anti-racism or systemic racism is. You don't even know how racism really works. You're dumb. You didn't go to college, whatever it happens to be. You have a degree in math, not social science. So they try to drain you of your ability to feel smart enough or be seen as smart enough to say what's plainly in front of your face, like that men and women are different. Like you're not smart enough. It's like you telling these biologist friends I have, I'm like, guys, nobody needs a biologist to tell anybody that men and women are different. Like people just know that. And so you just, instead of letting them drain your intellectual authority, you make fun of them. They said something stupid, so you make fun of them back. Second is that they try to drain your moral authority. They try to make you look like you're a bad person for doing what you did. And you can't fall into that. You're not the bad person for telling the truth. You're not the bad person for speaking plainly. You're not the bad person for standing up for kids or whatever else. You're not even the bad person for using harsh words like groomer or something like that to call out something that you see that's inappropriate. And they want to make you look like you're the bad person. The third thing they do is try to drain you of what I call psychological authority. That's where everybody keeps using the word gaslighting. It's not really in North Carolina. You just heard that. It's not really here. This thing that you're talking about is the newest boogeyman on the right. So they're trying to make you look crazy. They're trying to make you look like you're a conspiracy theorist. In fact, the term conspiracy theorist was invented to make people look crazy. We're talking about the things that they were doing in conspiracies. And again and again and again, you troll them to show that you're not afraid of that you're not going to get that taken away from you. And the simplest rule is, if you're laughing, they're losing. And so my kind of general advice, if you want to get on social media or whatever, and you want to participate in this, if you aren't writing something that makes you laugh, don't write anything. Because that's when they got under your skin. If you're mad and you're writing a little thing and you're getting all defensive and you've already lost. So if you're laughing, they're losing. And so what that means is you got to flip it over and make it funny. If you're not good at that, just go outside and do something better with your time than argue with idiots on the internet, because it doesn't matter. There's an infinite number of people who are wrong on the internet. Lots of them are paid to be wrong on the internet. Lots of them aren't even people. They're AI paid, they're built to be wrong on the internet. So you just can't let it get to you too much. But yeah, I am trying to teach, like, this is how you attack this thing. It doesn't have to be taken seriously. You don't have to take it on its terms, and you don't have to be manipulated into caring about the things it says or talking about things in the way they say you have to, so on and so forth. And you can just kind of carry on.
So I have to deal with every issue area in my job. So it's not just CRT, it's energy. It's, you know, just this morning I got an assignment. I got to look up, do a paper on lithium batteries through China and Uganda. So I'm all over the place. And so I look at social media as a little bit of a sport, and like if I'm in a new area, I've got to figure out what the best arguments are. I have like maybe 10 in my head, but which ones land and which ones are the most effective. So there's a little bit of back and forth. I try to find a thread where there's leftists there that are willing to engage, so that I can see what are they going to say, and then figure out what the best way are to attack it. And then once I've figured it out, I try to assert the moral position from the outset. So let me give you an example. You talk about the border. If you're talking about it in terms of, we need a secure border, there's 20 million illegals in this country, immediately the left is going to come out, assert the moral high ground by saying that you hate brown people and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, what's the way around that? Well, I like to assert from the outset that if you are not for a secure border, you are for cartels trafficking children for sex. You are for cartels raping as little as a third and as much as 8/10 of female migrants. And look, we can disagree in here on the position on border or whatever, but the point is, find the moral high ground, stick to it, and then put them on the defense immediately. And sometimes, you know, like getting to James' point, I'll open up my, I used to have a bigger Twitter thread. I deleted it when I was working for Chip, and then so I restarted one when I left, and I'm building that one back up. But one thing I love to do is if they're just going at you, you know, someone will come in and say, well, you're a white male, that's your opinion, and I'll say, that is a racist and sexist comment. And they just leave it there and go to bed, and not even look at the replies. And all night long, I'll wake up, and they will have spent all night with all of their friends going at it. I'm fully refreshed, they have no sleep, and I get a little bit of a kick out of that, knowing that, one, I'm right, and then I ruin their entire night knowing that they had to defend the fact that I'm now calling them a racist and sexist. So that's a little bit of the game. You gotta kind of, I mean, there are serious aspects of it, but you do need to have fun with it and understand that the people are truly vile. Like, you know, I just get a kick out of maybe ruining their evening. So.
That's right. It's always fun. And so, you know, Max, how do you decide, or how do you know if someone is entering into a good faith attempt to have a discussion, or they're just a troll from the get-go?
Yeah, it's a good question. On the social media front, I am less of the master or maestro, some more kind of constraints, a little bit less joie de vivre temperamentally than James has in some of this. So I try to have more of my conversations face-to-face to test out my theories, and I think maybe, you know, you can tell very quickly if somebody you're talking to is totally captured by these ideas, or if they're genuinely persuadable in a way that I'm not really sure you can tell a prior online. I think you should probably default to assuming anybody who's going to argue with you online is not really seeking further understanding. But face-to-face is very different, right? And to go back to, you know, some of the themes I was saying, most people who are doing this don't know that they're doing it. And so how do you make them realize what it is that they're doing? And the thing that seems to resonate the most with people is simply asking, hey, did you use that word 5 years ago? Because a lot of people understand, at least somewhat instinctively, that what has happened politically is downstream of a vocabulary shift, and that this vocabulary shift has not been a natural shift in language that has been done through normal human discourse. I mean, yes, language evolves, right? But language is very rarely seized and utilized for explicitly surreptitious and subversive purposes. The advance of the ideology that James has described has gone entirely by kind of buzzwords, right? Words that actually mean the exact opposite of what they appear to mean. But then, as James pointed out, you know, when you call them out of what it actually means, they'll say, oh no, it's just what it appears to me. So I found that, you know, asking somebody, hey, there's a lot about equity. What do you think equity means? When did you start hearing that term? Were you aware that this person defines equity this way? Isn't it kind of dangerous for there to be this word that might mean this horrible thing that you didn't start hearing until 5 years ago? Would you really think it's good to advance that? I mean, and I'm a pretty young guy, all things considered. I graduated college 11 years ago. I never heard the word problematic. That word has fundamentally redefined how people think about each other, people think about life. I never heard the word microaggression. I never heard the word, and I've really tried to keep remembering it. At Yale, 2011, never heard the word transgender. It was not a word. So when it comes to face-to-face, I found the most advanced I can make is when you just bring up to people, hey, all these words seem different. Do you know what these words mean? Do you think that they know what these words mean? And then you can, you know, bring up stuff that's prepared by scholars, stuff that you found online, but wait, this means this, that means that. Aren't you concerned? I am. And you'll probably get them to actually be a little bit concerned at the end of the day.
And as far as, you know, when we counter an argument, actually, when we're leading, right, we're taking flat wherever the target, as they say, how do you defend your values, Michele, while not letting attacks get under your skin? How do you do it?
Well, first, we have to remember that we stand on the right side of history. We stand on what is true. And I think separating the attacks from a personal attack. Like, people will say things and call me names or say things, and I don't even address that. I just say, it sounds like you're concerned about this. Is this your issue? And I think what was just brought up with Max is asking questions is huge, because most of them do not know how to express these talking points that they have just been downloaded into their mind from watching whatever they're watching on the television. And so this is true, and I say this to people often. There are two ways to govern. One is through civil discourse, and the other is through force. And we need to ask ourselves, how do you feel like we are being governed in 2022? I think it's very important to bring it back to, and being a follower of Christ, I believe that the Bible is true, and I will tell people, truth is offensive. I don't think I'm offending you, I think the truth is offending you.
And generally speaking, at least as it pertains to online communications, it's mostly polars. There's not a lot of people who are truly centrist. There's mostly people who are on there that have their minds set up. So that's a whole different, I look at that more as a political, this is how we set the way that the national conversation is taking place. And how to win that, because you're up against media who are automatically going to take the position and the narrative and the wording of the radical left online, and they're going to push that. And so you've got rest of America who may not be as polarized, and they're genuinely want to know. And so there's different audiences. There's who are you trying to convince? Your neighbors, activist groups, elected officials, and all of those have a different framework, and they all have different interests and centers of gravity that you have to consider when you're trying to convince them. Sometimes it's very specific, like this member of Congress takes a lot of input from his brother-in-law or his wife, and so understanding their positions, and that's how you can convince someone of something. Or someone, maybe that's an activist that's very, very, very passionate about one issue, and if you're on their side on that issue, they're going to be more willing to listen. So it's very strategic in terms of being persuasive to get your ideas across. But you're right, as much as we can do this in person, especially on the specific granular level, that's going to be way more successful. This is why door knocking is so highly valued in political operations, because online, as people in the safety of their own home retreat back and they're just immediately throw it, they feel empowered to say anything and everything they want about James. I see it all the time. They'll make as many, every claim in the world, they'll call him every name in the book, and he's a genuinely nice guy. But that's just the area, maybe not, I'm just, I could be wrong.
No, it's totally true.
and so, long story short, we just have to figure out what avenue we're in, but again, you don't want to gaslight your friends, but online, I do think that you need to, because that's what creates the discourse on online social media is what kind of creates the narrative that the media is going to use. And so I do think that we have to have a different approach there, a little bit more aggressive. We need to take the moral high ground, because if you can show other people that, I'm going to engage in these controversial topics and I'm dominating them, and I'm shutting them down, and none of their attacks are getting through to my armor, through my armor at all. Other people are empowered and they know how to engage it, and they can use elements, maybe not the full Monty there, but they can use elements of this in the workplace. They can use elements of this with their neighbors, and then they figure out the best ways to kind of defend their culture in these controversial settings.
Also, a few years ago, Dan Bongino said something that has just resonated with me, and he said, the conversation that you are having with that liberal lunatic is not for the liberal lunatic, it's for whoever is listening. And so I think we need to remember that too. And I think one thing that our nation is in desperate need of is hope and solutions. And so instead of us all just talking about how horrible everything is, how horrible, 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 if we can say, you know what, I agree with you that X, Y, or Z is an issue. What would you think if we tried this? Because I think when we get down to the basis of it, especially when we're talking about education, if you say to people across the board, regardless of what side of the aisle they find themselves on politically, if you say, do you agree that the objective of K through 12 education should be that every child that graduates from our public schools should be ready to enter into the workforce and be financially responsible and be able to express what their worldview is? Do you agree that they should be able to handle struggle, right? And deal with people that think differently from them? And if you want to go on to college, great, that's wonderful. But after 12 years of us funding an education, I think they should be productive members of society by the time they're 18 years old and voting. And I think Everyone would agree with that. Every sane adult would agree with that. So then you take that and you say, okay, well, I think X, Y, or Z. We should try this idea because this one hasn't worked. And in education, we can, Sloan has done an excellent job of showing the decline in education, specifically here in North Carolina. And when you say, okay, when did that start? Oh, that was the experiment that we called Common Core. So we did an experiment and it failed. So why don't we do this? Why don't we go back to when we were the greatest educational system in the world, and why don't we repeat what we were doing back then, right? And it's hard for people to argue with that.
It's also just very important to draw people as quickly as possible towards reality. I was particularly struck by what James said about the student he interacted with from California who was going home to a yearbook to study pronouns, right? In a way that is beyond the scope of this panel, but if we have 5 more hours, we can talk about it for 5 hours. What is the current madness is kind of downstream of assertion of language over reality, right? The idea that you should even foreground yourself with a pronoun is asserting that language has primacy over the physical. So the sooner that you can draw people's attention back to just real practical concerns, which are the kind of things that are pretty likely to catch the person in the middle who's just listening, it's gonna stick. And also something that the person who is peddling or pushing this stuff won't really have a clear answer to, right?
And they're not being inclusive of your viewpoints on gender.
Well, and so the gender thing, there's something else. I mean, I said a little bit, James said a little bit. I don't think it can be said enough. Like, there is no issue on which the other side is more over its skis than this one. And it is borderline criminal, the degree to which the right has not, seized on the basic physical reality of what is being done, and the basic physical reality of what is being done under the name of being affirming, which is a great word. How could you not be affirming? I don't know, because that leads to sterilizing children, right? We haven't seen that many Republican politicians, conservative pundits.
Because that truth is mean.
Well, it's terrible. It is absolutely.
But the reality is meaner, and you have to remember that.
These are largely, by all empirical accounts, these are largely autistic or homosexual children, or just generally socially awkward children who go through a certain phase that they would otherwise fall out of, and instead of otherwise falling out of that phase, they are sterilized. That is sick. It is demonic, and the physical. And I think we could fall far further as a country, but I think we'd have to fall a lot further than we're likely to fall at least in the next few years for sterilizing children to poll well. So bring it up. And I really don't think people know this. I think that what James is saying, what I'm saying, Wade's saying, I think probably recognition that hormone therapy leads to sterilization. I would be shocked if more than 5% of the national populace realizes this at this point.
And this is a great question for us. I have this question as a nurse. These children that think that they might be a different gender, explain to me why, when we have the medical ability to give them a synthetic hormone, why are we not giving them their biological hormone? Why did we automatically jump to, you must be in the wrong body?
Because queer theory is a war on the normal.
That's right.
That's right, it's to invert that which is normal. You can't reaffirm what is normal. And so this comes back to what Max was just saying about reasserting reality. Speaking of topics that are too deep to get into without 5 hours, I actually think of Marxism in its broadest form as a religion, where I know there's a lot of Christians who will understand. If you read your Gospel of John, at the very beginning, it appeals directly to God being the logos, the logic of reality, the structure of reality as it is, right? And so what you have with Marxism is a religion of pathos, to draw off the Greek parallel, which is a religion of feelings. And so what you have is a conflict between how somebody feels and what's real. And I have a fairly good example about why you shouldn't rely on somebody's feelings. It's been very persuasive, I'll share it with you. But this is ultimately also what we're talking about if you don't want to get into the whole war on the normal queer theory thing. It is because we have to affirm those feelings. We have to put feelings ahead of reality. We have to put feelings ahead, the temporary, subjective feelings ahead of that which is, down the track in reality for these people. The example I give, though, resonates with people very quickly is if anybody ever knows anybody who has had a panic attack, a lot of times they'll mistake it for having a heart attack. And if you go to the doctor, you say, doctor, oh my God, go to the hospital, emergency room, I'm having a heart attack. And the doctor, they admit you, they wheel you back very quickly, they put you, and you still, doctor, get the paddles, shock me, I'm having a heart attack. And the doctor's trying to hook up an EKG to you because the doctor needs to know if you're having a panic attack or a heart attack. And if they give you the paddles when you're having a panic attack, they're going to kill you. And your subjective experience, your phenomenological interpretation, if you want to get really philosophical about it, of the thing you're going through when you're having a panic attack is a bad arbiter for what's really going on. Turns out hooking up an EKG is way better at telling you what's really going on. And that's why the doctor's going to do it if he's worth anything. So when you start looking at that, should the doctor affirm the feelings of the person coming in and spouting off and saying I'm having a heart attack? Or should the doctor do the rudimentary test to make sure they bring in the right treatment? And that resonates with people immediately. And it's very easy to then go from that example into other examples and say, why are we taking the word of an upset 12-year-old about how they feel on a particular day as a reason to engage in absolutely life-changing behaviors for them? We wouldn't let them even get a tattoo, and we're going to let them, cut off their breasts or undergo hormone therapy or whatever else. Why on earth would we do that? To affirm their feelings. It's not any different than somebody going to the doctor and saying I'm having a heart attack, and in reality what they're having is a subjective feeling caused by an emotional response that mimics that feeling physiologically for them, but would kill them if they were treated for a heart attack, even being put on like statins or something like that. Would be a horrific idea. You wouldn't put people on those drugs. So bringing it to that kind of level can help bridge that disconnect. Finding real examples of other things where your feelings are not the best arbiter of reality. Your feelings, they love this word valid. Your feelings are valid. No, your feelings just are. They're an emotional response that's happening in your limbic system. They are not valid or invalid. It's not invalidating you to say the way you feel right now is not the best way to react to the situation you're in. Every toddler that's ever decided to throw themselves on the floor in the store and kick and scream, their feelings were not the best arbiter of deciding whether or not they should leave the store with their mom right now. And so bringing these kinds of examples back to drag people back to reality, to get them back, if you want to be Christian about it, to the logos and out of the pathos where they're lost in this sea of feelings, I think is incredibly important to winning over minds. And to the other point that was raised, every minute you spend arguing with some leftist on the internet or wherever else, I always get asked, how do you convert these people? I don't know. You don't.
Yeah.
Maybe you're talking to them for an audience. But what I found is that there are 10 or 20 people out there who I can talk to who are interested to figure out what in the world's going on right now, who will hear me and will go look into it and are reachable, versus this one person who doesn't want to be reached. And if I get 20 people awake for what's going on, in the amount of time I would have wasted squabbling with one person who's not going to change their mind anyway, that's a gigantic win for me. So focus your resources also. I don't try to convert woke people. Okay, that's your belief, great, okay. And I just go find other people to talk to because they're spouting nonsense and I don't have time for that, frankly.
So one thing I want to build on, because I was getting ready to say part of that, although in words that were way smaller and more simple, because I don't know half those words mean. So there's two, scenarios here on how you can kind of address someone who disagrees with you. If it's a serious, they they disagree and they want to know why you don't agree with them, I think there's power in pointing out to them kind of the logical problems with some of the arguments they're asserting. You just outlined a couple of them, and if they're just not, and this gets more into the memeing of conversations, there's a more sarcastic, and it's not that it's funny in how absurd it is, but getting back to the gender thing, you can throw their terminology right back at them in a way that shows just how ridiculous they are. So if they want you to use gender pronouns, you can say, well, I don't believe that, and you're not affirming my deeply held position on this, and I feel that's a microaggression, and I'm now triggered by this, and that's a form of discrimination, and just throw it in their face, put them on the defense. Now, is that going to be effective in changing their mind? No, they're just going to dislike you. But it is effective in kind of memeing the absurdity of that entire worldview and how dumb it is. Not necessarily effective in changing, academic conversations. That will probably solve no problems there. But it is helpful in kind of memeing the political conversation and assisting and pushing it into the absurd so that it's not considered serious, because it's really not serious. When you have a serious conversation to unwind it, it's absurd. So you really have to go do a lot of work, especially people like me who don't know this on the level that these two gentlemen do. So I do a lot of that, and then activists go out and take it from there and push that at the micro level.
That really can't work, I'll tell you. Right at the end of 2020, I created on the internet critical election theory. And I literally just copied all the verbiage out of critical race theory, like word for word, and changed it. You know, election fraud is systemic. Anybody who benefits from election fraud is going to continue to perpetuate election fraud.
Yes.
They're complicit in election fraud. I had all these people get really mad saying that I was claiming that the election was stolen, because it was, but I wasn't actually doing that. As a matter of fact, what I was doing was, you know, throwing back in their face the model of argumentation about critical race theory. Like, everything's racist because blah, blah, blah. Well, the election was clearly stolen because blah, blah, blah. So anybody who would come, these big journalists with their blue checks and their fancy pants and all these things, would come and try to dunk on me, and then I just would say something else like that. Oh, you're just showing your election fragility. Which is a lack of, you know, political stamina to deal with the fact that you're in a political environment that you don't like. Or something. You know, I just mirrored their language. Oh, and what it showed thousands upon thousands of people who got the joke was that they have created a false form of argumentation where they're just basically always right, and you could defend any proposition that way if you wanted to. And so throwing it back in their faces that way, even if it's just for the joke, is a worthwhile tactic. It takes a little bit of cleverness, but if you figure out just a little bit of how they argue everything, calling basically anything they say to you a microaggression, it's kind of funny to see what they do with it. And you will not make friends that way, though. You will not make friends that way.
You'll make friends with us.
Yeah.
And I have this for conspiracy theory. Everyone that wants to call you a conspiracy theorist, this is my response. I say, you know what? It's only a theory until there are the facts to prove it was a conspiracy. And I think people have just come to the idea that conspiracy theory is one word. You know, like it really doesn't exist. And I'm like, what you don't understand is we had an idea that maybe people were conspiring to do evil against us, and now we have the proof that they were conspiring. So you're right, it's no longer a theory. It's just a fact.
Future fact.
Yes, future fact.
I mean, yeah, future fact, that's good. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I think, look, that we will need to enter these discussions is a foregone conclusion. We have to, right? I mean, again, I talked early in the day about the Overton window. We've talked about it all day. And that window of what becomes politically acceptable, that only shifts by people. Doesn't shift by legislators, it shifts with people. And in order to do that, you've got to go back and carry that message with you. And so one way to do it that we're talking about is to put yourself on stage, right? To put yourself on stage and model, if you will, how to have those discussions so that you can have the courage, others can have the courage to do that, but you're going to have to get into these discussions. And so, you know, these are the ways to do it. Doing it in person is great. You know, doing it at work can be risky, but again, I think a lot of people, and Suter, you're a perfect example. Suter was a teacher here in this district, in Charlotte Metro School District, when we met a year ago. And she was a teacher who had been in grave standing for 9 years and finally had enough and said, I'm going on Fox News. And had to weather the storm. But, you know, there's a defining moment for all of us. The thing about our board at EFA is every one of us have been canceled and have come out the other side. It was very important to me to put together a board that could, you know, and our saying is, we're not gonna ask you to do anything we haven't done, except for we've been canceled. But living through that, and our job really with this organization is to make people actually confront it. Look, you know, when you train in martial arts, if you've done that, the best thing to do is get punched in the face right away, because then you don't fear it, right? Right, and so we're here to help get you to the other side of that. But, you know, these, you know, academics, influencers, candidates here can help you because they're modeling doing just that, right? And so they've tried to cancel every one of us, right? I mean, but we're still here. And you're gonna be canceled by people in your own party, by the way. Yeah. horizontal oppression is real. Definitely is. And so, but don't let that daunt you. Don't let that get you down. It's important to we don't like to ask for help a lot of times, but reaching out and saying, look, I'm being crossed here by somebody I thought was in my own tribe. What's going on, right? And so
you're giving out your number for when we need a good response?
yeah.
Well, I don't, I deal with that a lot. I deal with a lot of former friends. It's a wonderful feeling. You have to kind of develop an attitude of gratitude when a former friend shows you that they weren't really your friend, because they were only your friend so long as you agreed on everything. So I have developed that attitude, and it is difficult at first, but then you realize, and not to get, it's funny that I always wax biblical, but the truth is that, when God called Gideon, he went and he took his army and they took him down to the water, and I forget which way the drinking went, but everybody who drank wrong had to go home. So Gideon has this way small army, and they go down, and God's like, get rid of the stupid ones, because you're gonna fail if you go to war with them. And so he ends up with 300 people or whatever.
Is that paraphrasing?
That's exactly how it's written. That's exactly, that's a different translation.
The lost scroll.
Right? Yeah. Get rid of the dumb ones who can't even drink water right. You don't need to take them with you. But that's true, so you can't get too upset about that. A separate and unrelated point that I want to bring up, though, is that the biggest challenge that we often face as people present this stuff, we want to bring people back to reality. We want to do that. The problem is arguments tend to polarize. They tend to get people oppositional to one another. We've heard some really great advice about asking questions instead. That's very powerful. I cannot urge you strongly enough to support people, and I'm sorry, Dad, you're probably not that funny, but to support people who are genuinely funny, to get comedy that's effective about this stuff out there. Because what actually changes hearts and minds is the ability to have an off-ramp, to laugh at yourself for your own stupid beliefs. So I agree with Max's hypothesis that the vast majority of people who are perpetrating this do not know what they're perpetrating. They're going along with it, they think it's integral to being a good person, they've caught up with a fad, whatever it happens to be, some of both, some of all. Maybe they've imbibed a little bit of it, maybe they bought into a little. But if they can laugh at themselves, and maybe you're not the person to make them laugh at themselves, but maybe JP Sears is. Right, so you find somebody who's funny, who's brought up this topic, and you get them to laugh a little bit. I am still utterly convinced that for all of the power and all of the magic and all of the things that matter that happened with the civil rights movement, the peaceful protests, the passages of the laws, etc., that people like Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy that did this racial comedy that gave white people who were still racist the ability to laugh at themselves for their racism, did more to drop racism in this country than probably any other thing. Laws actually just make people mad. I mean, we're in the South, but we still fly the stupid flag because, I get it. But if you can give people who are stuck in this, and maybe you aren't the one to make the joke, maybe you are, but if you find comedy that makes you laugh about it and you share that with people, the easiest way to off-ramp them from this ideology or any ideology is to get them to be able to laugh about it and to see that it's silly and to, in that sense, kind of forgive themselves for participating in it. Because otherwise they're going to try to save face. So if you say, this is your argument, you're participating in communism, which I do all the time, then they're going to say, I'm not participating, and you're going to get their back up against the wall. But if they start laughing about it, it's a completely different circumstance. So try to promote humor. And if you're bad at jokes, which means if you think you're good at jokes, don't be the one telling the jokes.
And one important thing to remember is we all have different roles, so we're not going to have the same social media persona, and that's completely fine. Like Max is going to have a completely different persona than me, and James, of course, I think you've just invented your own unique silo persona, which is awesome. But so we don't all have the same, and we don't all have the same mandate, and we all have different responsibilities for what we're trying to achieve. And so that's going to take different strategies.
A journalist called me the Donald Trump of intellectuals.
Stable genius?
Yeah.
I think I've called you a stable genius. No, wait, I called you a stable genius.
Yeah, I know.
I don't think either of those two
But all
things are
three
true.
of you. Was it very stable? Okay.
I don't want James to have a monopoly on biblical allusions for this panel, so I want to just add on to one thing that he said, which is he gave the comment that in his belief Marxism is a form of a religion. He is not the first person to say this. The first person the person who said it best to my taste was Whittaker Chambers, a man who literally was a communist agent, became a convicted American Christian patriot, accused somebody, conspiracy theory, of being a communist agent who actually split the country. But he said that Marxism is the second oldest religion known to mankind, founded when the serpent whispered to Eve, "Ye shall be as gods." Right? And I think that is something, I mean, depending on who you're talking to, right? Like a little bit of appeal to a little bit of old religion, very basic stuff, that was a big reaction I got from this room. This is a self-selected room, but I think a lot of people can see that within this, there is just a movement for man to try to assert himself as a god over others, to invent a theory of man, This is all pretty new stuff in some way, and then to try to impose it from a position of authority. Now, it takes a lot to do that. It takes a lot of social power, a lot of capital, stuff James tweets about all the time. I mean, it's taken hundreds of millions, billions of dollars over the course of many years to kind of beat people into trying to accept it. It's not going to take that much to flip it, because it is all very stupid. Because people aren't very smart. We're smart people, no offense. We're not very smart. People aren't very smart. We can't really create an account of ourselves and beat other people over the head with it and expect not to get mocked for very long, unless the other side manages to control the means of production, which is attempted, but which it will fail. So there is a certain tone, depending on who you're talking to. Maybe it's just, hey, doesn't this feel kind of evil to you? And I think a lot of people will be like, oh, evil, that's a word. I remember when that word used to be in common lexicon. Or, as James said, make fun of other people who are more woke than your friend who might be dabbling with it, and let them see the absurdity of that. And nobody likes being laughed at. A lot of this is kind of has cultural cachet, because if you don't agree with it, you'll be called a bad thing. That could be flipped. If you agree with it, you look ridiculous. And I think we're in the process of doing that, and if the tide will turn, it'll turn partly from an appeal to God and the basics, and partly from just mocking the stupidity of mankind trying to claim that he is a god.
I'll give you a good example of a humor that just popped in my head, but first I'll tell you, I think the first reference to Marxism being a religion was actually made by Karl Marx, who originally had titled the Communist Manifesto The Confession of Communist Faith, until Engels said, that's a little too on the nose, Karl, don't do that. The original title for the Communist Manifesto was A Confession of Faith for communist ideas. So certainly Marx was the first to name it. But a good example of giving somebody something to laugh at, I was talking with this fellow. Unfortunately, the podcast got eaten by the machine, and it wasn't a lie, it really did. But I did a podcast with a guy that's pretty far left. His name's Josh Steps. He's a very nice man from Australia. I think he's a confused man. But we were having a conversation. He's telling me this story about how he thinks critical race theory is important. They were at this barbecue with his friends, he said, and somebody ends up telling a joke that was a little racially off color, and somebody got all offended, and they called him out and said, I was a little bit racist. And then, he's telling me the story. He's like, the bad side is that the barbecue kind of fell apart. We weren't really having fun, and everybody kind of went home. And I said, well, I have an important question for you about this. And he said, okay, what? And I said, was the joke funny? And he started laughing and said, yeah, actually it was. And I was like, racist? And he cracked up. Because he knew that I caught him in exactly what that kind of thing, though. Was the joke funny? That, somebody told a racist, well, was the joke funny? And then when they say yes, because they thought it was funny, of course, then you point out that implicates them in the thing that they think is great. That was just one little example of the kind of things that you want to kind of look for those opportunities if you're going to be in this conversation with somebody who's kind of in the middle of the road. But I agree 100% with what Max just said. I invoke the story of Genesis 3 very frequently. This is the oldest battle in humanity. It is the oldest spiritual battle in humanity. And whether we want to frame it in terms of logos versus pathos, reality versus fiction, or language, whatever we want to frame it in, it's the exact same thing. It's the idea in Marx's ontology of man or theory of man is in fact this exactly, that man makes man by making society that makes man in its turn, with the purpose of making man increasingly socialist, is in fact exactly the whisper of the serpent, we shall be as gods. And you can read that throughout the literature. So if you want to know what story you're in, go read Genesis 3, you're in that story, and see what you can do and to keep your children from eating the apple. That's basically what's being offered.
And of course, the absurdity of that is you don't even need CRT at all to oppose racism. It has nothing to do with opposing racism. So, that just struck me that he thought you need that system and framework to oppose racism. But anyways.
Well, thank you guys for coming. This is the end of the program. I want to thank you guys very much. Very good. I want to thank all of you guys for coming and making us wonderful. To have this much brain power in one room is really, for this movement, it's a turning point. It is an opportunity that no one in the country has had. So I want to thank you for giving us that. And we take it as a great responsibility to do something great and to be the shining light for every other state in this